Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solar Astrology Podcast. I am Ambra and I'm joined by Amiya. Today, we are going to talk about the zodiac sign of Gemini. We are recording this on May 26th at 11:55.
Hello, everyone. Amiya here. So, to dive right in, Gemini is a sign ruled by Mercury. It is a mutable sign, and it is the young part of the Mercury.
Yeah, the yang sign are fire and air. So it is very interesting because it's also the first air sign that we meet through the wheel of the zodiac.
Exactly. And I also think it's interesting because it feels like the first three signs of the season are very much like the element, like the embodiment of the element itself. So Aries being the most like fiery fire, Taurus being the most earthy earth, and Gemini really feels like the most airy air with its mutability and everything.
Mhm.
So it's also interesting because the modalities are in parts of three. So it's always cardinal, fixed, and mutable. But the elements are in parts of four. So it's very interesting that the next sign that we're getting, Cancer, it's the last element that we're getting, but we're getting a first repetition of the modalities. And in Gemini, it's still like the last part of the modalities.
I agree. So it's again something new. Whereas, of course, also Cancer is going to be a new sign, a different sign, but there is something we have met already through the zodiac season. I 100% agree. And as you were saying about being the most airy air, it's just because if you take air, it's not an element that can be contained. It's an element that loves freedom and tends to freedom naturally. If you put it together with the fact that it's mutable air, well, it comes naturally to say what we just said. There are no planet exalted or in fall in Gemini, but Jupiter is in detriment. And that's because Jupiter and Mercury are polarity. They are opposite archetypes, which we think they are a little bit hard to grasp the opposition between them because it's not as hard as other opposition such as Sun, Saturn, Moon, Saturn, Venus, Mars, because those polarities are more visceral, are more instinctual and bodily, whereas Jupiter and Mercury are both related to the intellect, to one beliefs, and so it's easy to master in this sense.
Yeah, it's usually easier for the individual if you would have Mercury in Sagittarius or Jupiter in Gemini in that sense. And it is very interesting because also if you look at the planets itself, at least the seven inner planets, Mercury is a very small planet. It moves, almost at the same speed of the sun, even a bit
Mhm.
faster.
Yeah.
So it's always, doing its thing. There's also like 3 to 4 Mercury retrogrades every year. So it's a planet that is like so fast, doing so many things all at once. And again, it's very tiny. And then
Mhm.
you have Jupiter, which is like this big, huge, gassy planet. It takes way slower. But it's not just that. It's just when I think about them and I think of like, oh, okay, so I'm putting Mercury into Jupiter sign. It's like a small planet inside of a big sign. That can get overwhelming, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we can see, with the analyzing that Mercury really like the details it likes to take apart, and it's very fast and quick moving.
Mhm.
And then the same goes if you reverse it. Well, it's like, I don't want to see all the details. I want
Yeah.
to believe in this thing. Like, I don't need all the details. So that's really how I see the Mercury and Jupiter polarity in a way.
Yeah, I agree because Mercury usually likes to break things down and analyze the small pieces that make up something. Whereas Jupiter wants to have the big picture of the whole. So, it's very easy to imagine Mercury and Jupiter in a debate. Mercury analyzes everything that has been said and maybe thinks about a logical implication. And maybe Mercury is also able to step up and say, no, I don't think that what you said has value. I think is irrational. I think it's not logical. Whereas Jupiter might be more like, no, but you don't see the big picture. You don't see the wall. Jupiter wants to have a sense of communion, a sense of faith as well. So it can be way more dogmatic sometimes. And Jupiter tends to unify as opposed to Mercury, as we just said. Just to imagine a Jupiter Mercury debate, I feel that Jupiter would get mad because Mercury loses the point of the discussion. Maybe Mercury's like analyzing so many things and then he's forgetting the main reason of the discussion. Whereas Mercury could get crazy because Jupiter is lacking of that critical analysis. So those are the characteristics why those planets have this opposition and polarity. Those planets are a polarity like the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius. In Gemini, we see once again the thinking process, the analyzing ability. And in Sagittarius, we see the beliefs, the faith, the wisdom of lived experiences.
Yeah, and I also would like to remind the people that are listening that the planets itself are very archetypal, and that we as human beings are a lot more complex than just a specific archetype. But we need to explain and understand the planets that are ruling over the signs so we can see how this applies into our own lives. And I'm saying this as someone that has a Moon Mercury opposition in Gemini and Sagittarius. For me, I'm like, I can hold both of this. For me, it's like, oh, it's not like I'm one or the other. I can see both Jupiter and Mercury being active.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I can see at times in my life how I definitely get into the overanalyzing and how that is a very important part of my process. Even just the way that I'm dealing with emotions, which is like the moon sign in a way, and how I need that. But then so many times I can also see where it's just like it's about faith again, and it's about the lived experiences and how I should trust the lived experiences and the intuition that I'm feeling, which is equally as important. So I just wanted to bring that out when we are discussing this, because it is absolutely normal to feel very related to many things that are being said, and your whole life and your whole birth chart is one big thing. So
Mm-hmm.
there's many things that are applicable, and especially with transits and timing techniques, there might be phases in your life where something is much more prominent, another thing is less prominent, and all of a sudden there's like many Gemini transits going on, or you have your perfection year, in the sign of Mercury. And then all of a sudden you realize, whoa, like I have this inside of me. Like I have this quality as well. And it suddenly gets so prominent, and you feel so much like this specific archetype. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I just wanted to get that out there. And I think it's also just interesting mentioning this during Gemini season, because that what I said is very much to do with, analyzing, like essentially
Mm-hmm.
we're doing in astrology itself. And that's why Mercury is also linked to the practice of astrology, because it's gaining the knowledge, it's observing, the
Mm-hmm.
archetypes, the time, how it's moving, what it's doing, what is popping up. So it's a very mercurial practice in itself, the study of astrology.
That's very beautifully said. I would also connect what we just finished to discuss with the fact that is the third and so the last sign of spring, which means it's the end of a season. It's the transition from spring to summer. But what happened after the summer solstice is that the days start to get shorter. So we can say that Gemini is the precursor to the dark part of the light season, because we have Aries till Virgo being the light half of the year, whereas Libra till Pisces being the dark side of the year. And, so Mercury is inherently aware of the fact that things are going to shift. Mercury kind of feels that. after his time, things will shift. So he's open, he's mutable. I think that it also has to be mutable because he recognizes that dark will come, and in a way, it can be a darker sign. Not surprisingly, it is associated with the occult, and occult in itself means what is hidden, which is so mercurial. And Gemini takes and absorbs this component of the light of the year. Also, interestingly, Virgo is the sign before Libra. So also Virgo is the last sign of summer that precedes the darkness incoming. So Mercury really has this connection. And I think it's also why Mercury is so critical. Whereas Jupiter signs, Pisces and Sagittarius, are before the equinox and solstice. Of course, the spring equinox and the winter solstice, which are point in which the light starts to increase again. And so Jupiter signs are way more hopeful, faithful, joyful. This also explains the Jupiter-Mercury polarity, and in this case, Gemini-Sagittarius polarity.
Yes, what I'm thinking of the seasons, especially when the latter parts of the year are happening, in a way, it's like it's very much needed, you know? And Mercury is very much like, okay, you know, not everything is just as it seems. Like, let's, you know, be very much aware of all these facts. Like, we can still and go have fun, but let's not forget that there is also, you know, other things coming. And then in the darker part of the year, it's so important to have this faith, to believe, to let things in the realm of like imagination happen. I mean, I think both Mercury and Jupiter have its own sense of imagination. Every planet has.
It is everything much about transition. In fact, Gemini kind of plays with light and darkness sometimes for each piece of information. And sometimes, people have stereotypes and people might say, oh, Gemini is double-faced. And it is not inherently true, but it is true that sometimes Mercury can see both the light and the darkness, the good and the bad. And sometimes he's so good at playing with those parts of a message and they can filter just one side of the coin. So it's not lying, but it's maybe hiding part of the story. It's something that it's very easy for Gemini, and I feel like it's maybe one of the lessons I would say that Gemini can learn is when it's correct, maybe when it's moral to filter some information is for the sake of making a person feel either in a difficult situation, or is it because of your own advantages? It really depends, but it's something that Gemini can play so well with, I would say.
Yeah, I think generally Gemini is still like, you could say, a young age. It's a childlike age, and it's very much of curiosity. And Gemini really likes to play with that curiosity. And I think this is where the two sides come in, where it's just like it's fun to explore these things, to be like, oh, like what happens if I go there? What happens if I say this? What happens if I don't say this? What happens if I say some information or withhold some information? And I think, again, Gemini, especially, in like an adult version, is very much more aware of that fact, especially of, also darkness and both sides. And I think it just really likes to play with seriousness and unseriousness, because in a way it's just so much fun playing with that and realizing, oh hey, like, yeah, like life is so unserious, like I should just laugh at this. But then at other times it's like, oh no, like when everybody's laughing, maybe I should what if I take
Mm-hmm.
things serious? So
Yeah.
it's this playful, curious energy, which is very much present in Gemini. And I also want to mention like the difference between being childlike and childish,
Mm-hmm.
because being childlike is a very good thing, and something that we as adults should still keep on doing, which is, staying curious and like having the awe of like wonder and exploring the world and going out and always being like, oh, I'm ready for something new. I'm ready to still be surprised by life and see where this is taking me. And then on the other hand, childish, which is maybe like the darker sides of Gemini, which
Mm-hmm.
every sign has. Like just being immature and then,
Mm-hmm.
not taking anything seriously. I mean, that's definitely like a downside or something that can happen with Gemini, where it's like just doesn't take anything seriously. And then it leads to like a weird, like passiveness to life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
I get what you're saying. Yeah, what I like the most about Gemini and this playful energy is that, as you said, it's childlike, but there is a lot of genuine intention into that. Sometimes, maybe when Gemini is grown up, yes, then it's more aware, and this playfulness cannot be the best, but in general, playfulness is something beautiful and super healthy. I also like to see this time of the year, the bees are so busy pollinating. I don't know why, but I see more insects. They are communicating more in their network. They always do. But I don't know, it feels like in Gemini season, everything is more buzzing.
Definitely.
And
I
in
feel
a
like
way,
that's such a good word.
yeah, and it is, yes, like playful in a sense, but it's also a lot about communication and intercommunication. Gemini, being an air sign, has a lot to do with communication. So sometimes also Gemini has to learn how to deliver properly a message. Because once again, if you have, or if you want to say something to someone, maybe you can say everything just because you don't care if the message is heavy. But sometimes this thing might be developed because Gemini can sometimes lack a little bit of touch into this compared to another mutable sign, for example, Pisces. Pisces might be way more, careful and kind and welcoming and supportive. Sometimes Gemini is like, no, I just want to deliver this message. And then maybe it tries to, I don't want to say dissociate, but detach a little bit from the consequences. Because when you play too much, then you have consequences to hold. And Gemini usually doesn't like to hold things. Gemini likes to move around. But if you play in the wrong neighbor, then you have consequences. This is maybe my Saturn in Gemini talking, which is kind of hilarious, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also need to mention that Mercury itself is like associated with this, like the psychopomp, and who travels, between the worlds and even goes into the underworld. So in
Mm-hmm.
a way, just Mercury itself is like the deliverer of messages, like independently of its nature of what the message is. Mercury just wants to deliver the message.
Exactly.
And I think that kind of plays into there. And again, like every sign, right? It can have its super beautiful, positive way of showing up in your life or showing up in other people's lives. But it can also have, a darker aspect, just
Mm-hmm.
as with everything. And of course, there's also so many things that you would have to look at your own personal birth chart that would play into, how something is. affecting you or being coming through you or other people,
I
which is
completely
also
agree.
very a very mercurial thing once again, like analyzing, where things are coming from, where the messages and stories are coming from.
Yeah. In fact, once again, being a little bit redundant maybe, but before you were saying that Mercury in general is associated to astrology. And in a way, astrology, if you take astrology as a form of divination, it's kind of waiting and reading some messages and
Mhm.
then explaining them by words. That's it. So it has inherently this quality of, picking up messages and communicating them.
Yeah, I think once Gemini realizes that knowledge is not just everything that you can see with your eyes, and that there is also a very beautiful intuitive part, and like especially like pattern recognition. I think that's such a mercurial thing.
Mhm.
When it realizes that, once it, because sometimes it can get too much into like the academic mind.
Yeah.
But that's not all of Mercury. like the knowledge and the way that Mercury perceives things go far beyond that. And once it starts to like see the connections and that there's a language behind just the visible words that we even speak, that there is like an intelligence in nature and how nature communicates with us, how symbols communicate with us, how you see the patterns forming, then it begins to have like a very beautiful journey of understanding how the whole universe really, communicates to you, with you, and that you, as a maybe a Gemini prominent person, can be that conduit for that intelligence to speak through you.
Mhm. Yeah, beautifully said. That's really, once again, the relation between Gemini and the occult. But it's also nice because Gemini coming after Taurus feels like as if Aries and Taurus, you know, started the life, then Taurus life is fecund, is flowering, is abundant, is feminine, and in Gemini, it feels like as if the zodiac is saying, wow, the nature I have around me is very beautiful. How the fuck is possible that it works? How does it work? Tell me how this beautiful thing works. And, in order to understand how nature works, you need science. Once science was not as we intended today, it was maybe alchemy or the study of nature, or, but then, like in a way, a person that is into the occult and a person that is in science have something in common because both they want to understand, they seek to understand what is hidden by the eyes. It's very
Yeah,
beautiful. It's the need of question nature and the nature of things.
because usually you have this image when you see alchemy, and it's like the marriage of the sun and the moon.
Mhm.
And that forms the philosopher's stone. And what is the sun and the moon? It's a polarity. And what are all the mutable signs? Where they are the polarity. They're like
Mhm.
this and that. I mean, Gemini itself, it's a twin, so it's two things. For the first time, we see two things, which also follows up on the thing you mentioned with like, okay, Aries is the ram. Well, it's one thing. Taurus is the bull. It's one thing. Gemini's are twins.
Mhm.
It's two things all of a sudden.
Yeah. Mutable sign are particularly good in navigating the opposites. So maybe it's just a personal feeling, but if you take Gemini and Sagittarius, yes, they are a polarity. They both tend towards opposite ways. But being mutable, it's easier to be inflexible for them, you
Mhm.
know. Whereas if you take maybe cardinal signs, cardinal opposition, the argument can be more opposing somewhat. Whereas mutable sign can be like they tend to have a better understanding of polarities in general.
Yeah, I think it's Like if you would put all the modalities in one room, or like all the signs of the modalities, like, all the cardinal signs or all the fixed signs in one room, and then all the mutable signs in one room, I think the mutable room would probably have the easiest time of getting along with each other.
Yeah.
Because they would, like, the worst that could happen, they would be like, okay, let's agree to disagree, you know? While the other rooms would, I think the worst room would be the fixed room.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I agree. Because the cardinal will be like, yeah, if you want to go towards one direction, I want to go towards the opposite direction. We can close it here and we can just ignore each other. But the fixed signs, oh God.
Yeah, they would not bug down. They
Yeah,
would just have like,
exactly.
I haven't. We say this with like our how do you say that?
Fixed rising signs?
Yeah, our fixed rising. We have the fixed cross,
Yeah,
with all you love, but the fixed room would be the worst.
exactly. And we can maybe talk a little bit about the comparison between Gemini and Virgo, a sign which is also ruled by Mercury and that we haven't touched this far. There are differences between those signs. Virgo is an earth sign. Virgo not just analyzes things, but is way more methodical being an earth sign and is way good. It's really good in finding solutions or improving things or giving methods on how to face a problem. Also, just what I wanted to say before that, then I forgot. It's the mercurial energy. uh, uh, Talking about the mutable sign, I find fascinating that Mercury is said to be neutral, gender neutral, because a gender was assigned to to each planet, and Mercury could be either feminine or masculine, depending of whether it was oriental, which means a morning star, or occidental, which is like an evening star. Morning stars rise before the sun, evening stars rise after the sun.
Mercury always provides a bridge. It's never just one thing, because you also have to have a fixed archetype of something being not fixed. And Mercury serves as that archetype of providing just a duality of everything, truly, of being just like, oh, I'm here and I'm there and I'm this and I'm that and I'm everything and nothing all at once.
Yeah, we have to understand that Mercury is a planet of polarities itself. It can always depend. It's the most flexible, I would say. Also, it's interesting that Mercury is so special because Mercury is also exalted in the sign of Virgo.
Yeah, it's
It's
the
in
only
domicile
sign.
and
Yeah, yeah,
exalted in
exactly.
Virgo. And
Yes.
it's like, yeah, that's a weirdness. That's a fucking weirdness. And Mercury is the janitor of this particularity.
Yeah, exactly. It's the only sign that is exalted in its domicile sign.
Yeah,
All the other exaltations are in other signs.
which is so fascinating because, it's Virgo again gives solutions. Sometimes the difference between Gemini and Virgo is that Gemini asks so many questions, but then keeps thinking, keeps questioning. Whereas Virgo is really focused on the process of coming up with an answer in a way. Also, Gemini comes up with answers, but it's, it tends to think a lot. And if it doesn't come up with an answer, it will move to the next question. whereas Virgo wants to dig in and find not the question, but the perfect question by using methodical and strict methods, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's also what we said in the beginning, where you can see that it's like a continuation, right? Where as Gemini is just on the border of initiating, like the darkness taking over, so that the days getting, shorter again. And Virgo is on like the tipping point of like the darkness officially taking over. Like, okay,
Yeah.
now it's the darker part of the year. So it's almost like a continuation of the Mercury we see in Gemini. And proves your point in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think also, first of all, also because Mercury is exalted in Virgo, it's not exalted in Gemini, sorry. But it's like, if you also compare just the elements, air and earth, and earth is way more about practical and physical things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you will be able to see the Virgo mercurialness way more in, like, again, this process oriented things where they're
Yeah.
like, I'm going to write a whole dissertation of like this thing. It's a very visible like process that they need to go
Mm-hmm.
through about like analyzing and doing tests and trials and errors. um Whereas in the airy part, it can be a little more ungrounded in that sense. Doesn't mean it's better or worse. That's just what it is. And it's also like, if I think about the good part of like airy air, the power of having the right question at the right time is so much more powerful than maybe having the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like asking the right questions that lead you to the exploration of thinking about something you haven't even thought about before is so powerful. Like, I think good questions are far more important than good answers.
I love that. Also, to connect with what you're saying, like some seconds ago, Gemini senses the dark coming, but it's still in the light half of the year. So Gemini can allow himself to be more playful, play around, be more chill, if you want to say like that. Whereas Virgo's like, okay, now the real darkness is going to come. Let's be prepared. Let's have solution. Let's have protection. So we need that methodical earth, literally also for a form of survival in a way to the dark season. We need method to survive harsh conditions, whereas Gemini is like, maybe question what's the point of things. It has maybe a darker edge, but there is no need yet in Gemini season to think about survival and really focusing on finding a solution, finding resources and provide stability. I mean, it's the sign after Taurus. We have enough stability at that point of the
For
year.
sure, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's like, it's just before summer, and
Yeah.
summer is usually I mean, again, I just have to mention this. We're talking here of the northern hemisphere,
Mm-hmm.
not the other hemisphere. I know the seasons are switched there, but we're not taking that into account right now since we live here, and there are many far more better astrologers out there that live in these countries that have, good things to say about that. And I also, what I find interesting about Virgo, at least that's here like that most of the time, depending on how long, usually, there's countries that have super long summer holidays and some have shorter, but usually around like September is when the new school year starts,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so like Virgo Mercury, in my
Yeah.
opinion. It's so like, okay, now the summer is over. Okay, let's, get into
Let's be
studying.
serious.
Let's be more serious in a way, truly. So that also just always reminds me of and also just the academic, and I don't mean that in like a unfun way. I mean that in the most fun way. Like it should be fun, doing these work. And it usually is, especially if you study something that you really enjoy doing. Isn't it kind of fun, actually?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least it should be, right? Going back to school after summer and getting more serious again after, you had your relaxing summer holidays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes you can add a little bit of sense of purpose. After you took a long break, you're like, okay, I'm having a break. And now? But of course, yeah, when you grow up and then you miss school because of the break. It's always like
For sure,
that.
yeah.
But it's something that, students can experience. And again, Mercury is related to youth, so young people, which makes total sense, I would say.
Yeah. We're all students of life, aren't we?
Yeah, we studied at the University of Life, certified on Facebook.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I think at this point we can also mention I mean, I just like to bring this in briefly. I'm not like a tarot card expert, but I have definitely like analyzed a lot of
Mm-hmm.
tarot things, just because there was also so much correlated to the zodiacs. And it's not like Gemini is related to the Lover's card, but Mercury, sometimes it's also Uranus, but I think just generally I really correlate like the first card, like the Fool, and like the Fool's journey of being very like Gemini Mercury, because it takes like a childlike person. For me, that is like
Mm-hmm.
a fool. And when I say fool, I really mean that in the most positive way ever. To go and set out on a journey without like any real preparation, just simply with curiosity and the urge to go out to explore.
Definitely. Also, maybe we haven't focused so much about the element of Gemini because being an air sign and not just being Mercury, Mercury itself is related to communication, but also this is a quality of air. Gemini kind of like needs to have relationships. He usually has a kind of big network of relationship or, people around them, but communication is the base for a good relationship, both in friendship and romantically speaking. So sometimes Gemini has to understand that communication is beyond words. Communication can be also bodily communication and the way you tone of your voice, the intention of while you're speaking to someone, the tact sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like that's a bit of the like the Cancerian things you can see when we
Mm,
when we go like a sign further, where it's like, okay, like we have the groundwork, we can communicate, we can ask questions. Okay, what do we need next? Well, for things to actually last and have some sort of impact, well, we need emotions. We,
exactly.
so that's like the next part. And in a way, it's also definitely something that Gemini can learn and usually is very willing to learn. I personally am always so fascinated about communication and how we communicate each other and how that can impact each other. I've read so many books and things on that, and it's something that, I mean, I can see it as a Gemini moon, right? But I just love learning about that, like human interactions and how we
Yeah.
can make our interactions easier, or usually not easier by not communicating correctly, is just so fascinating.
Yeah, my Libra moon is getting triggered. So of course this is something in common to air signs. So for sure, the
Yes,
the,
all the
i-
air
the
signs, yeah.
interest into communication, and I don't know. I also think it's so fascinating.
Yeah, and especially how it's something that can be learned. Like
Hmm.
you can improve your communication skills. It's not something that you're just, like, oh, that's this, and you're stuck with this forever. No, it's like you can learn. And how do you usually learn that? Again, a super mercurial process. Well, you learn by analyzing past situations and how
Hmm.
this makes you feel, or just so many things. Um so it's an endless process. Like
Yeah,
you can never uh, stop learning. Like it's
yeah.
it's always ongoing.
And I also think that it's quite funny to compare the modalities of the different air sign because for example I feel like for Gemini it's enough to communicate what they think is true, to communicate the truth, but then they are not necessarily fixated onto that. If you want to believe them, then it's good for you. If you don't want to, they will move into the next subject. Whereas for example Libra might be is way more careful and yeah attentive, that you and like you don't take it personally, or that everything is in harmony and that we are polite, we are being polite, and equality is respected within a communication, so that maybe someone doesn't take over the other. It's way more attentive to these things. And Aquarius being a fixed sign might be way more strict and rigid, especially being ruled by Saturn. It can be a lot like, that's my idea. I think my idea is worth it. I think my idea is the idea. So it's way less flexible, of course, being a fixed sign. And sometimes can be a little bit, what could we say, prominent, tend to be overarching. That's a quality I would associate to the communication actuated by Aquarius.
For sure. Yeah. It's like you can have great conversations with Aquarius if you vibe with their ideas,
Yeah,
same
yeah.
page. Otherwise, they usually don't bother so much, which is fine. Like that's also great. Like Gemini maybe can learn to, not talk to everyone about everything all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, everything has its downsides and good sides.
Oh, we haven't mentioned actually the parts of the body. And again, being Gemini, the sign of the twins, it rules the pairs, right? So it rules the lungs. We have two lungs. It rules the hands, the arms, and the shoulder. And of course, we have two of them. Of course, it also rules the speech. But I think that it's also fascinating. Oh, sorry. I think it's also fascinating that it rules dualities within the body.
Yes, we can also see this in Libra, which rules over the kidneys, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, no, I'm not mistaken, but and also just the fact that we say so much with our hands. Like the hands are so linked to speech.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And I mean, even the fact that you have sign language, you can literally speak with your hands if someone, is muted or cannot bring out words. So it's very mercurial, like the hands and how linked they are just with how we express ourselves. And even sometimes if you don't know the language of a person,
I
you
knew
can
that.
point with your hands.
Sorry.
You can say things. Just from my like observation and over the past few years, how just breath work has become increasingly popular. I mean, I knew about breath work before, since I grew up with many yogic philosophies, and it's like called pranayama there. So it's a very natural part to do. But usually, what the breath work techniques you get when you're like initiated into yogic practices, it's usually later on. You actually have to have a good foundation before you start doing breath work, because it is so powerful. So I have a bit of a vegetarian beef with with how popular it got, and how like some people like I think many people just start doing it without realizing how powerful it is. So it can like really bring up a lot of stuff you might not be ready to face. But that's a whole conversation on its own. But just generally talking about breath work and how powerful the breath is, and how much you can, first of all, calm down the nervous system, which is also so linked to Gemini, but then you can also really activate it. And you can do so much with the breath. Like it's so essential for living experience. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's 100% fascinating.
And also, what is interesting about the breath of life is like when a baby is born,
Yeah.
it's the first I'm like talking as if I ever had children. I don't have any children. I don't know too much about like giving birth or anything, but just the fact that the baby, the child is inside the womb and it's linked to the mother, and the first thing it like does on its own is taking the first breath.
Yeah.
So that is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
even I don't really know what exactly I want to say with that, but just
No,
like
but
I guess the power of breath and how just
it makes
how much
sense.
it does, you know?
It makes sense, and I love, the correlation with Mercury and Gemini to children itself. And of course, the first thing you do after being born is breathing. So Gemini also rules the breath. I think it's just so nice correlation. Also, continuing along the line that Mercury as a trickster, Mercury can be a trickster, and Gemini so can be a trickster. Tricksters are clever, but sometimes, there is a little bit of manipulation, distorting the facts and reality and knowledge. And we also wanted to touch on the fact that probably many of you have heard about Mercury retrogrades. If you don't know what Mercury retrograde is, I mean, also other planets go retrograde, but basically it's because each planet has its own synodic cycle around the sun, and at certain point they slow down, so their speed slows down, and the movement of the Earth is constant. So from our standpoint here on Earth, it looks like as if the planet is moving backward. This is called retrograde, but it's not really moving backward. It's just like an optical effect due to the planets slowing down. And as I was saying, I feel very much that the trickster qualities of Mercury, the childlike trickster qualities of Mercury, are kind of eccentric during Mercury retrograde. Sometimes it feels like Mercury's really having fun.
For sure. And I also think it's so interesting because so many people that don't know astrology have heard about Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
It's like a term that is like so like everybody has heard about it. Many people make fun of it. I don't know. I just feel like it's so trickstery in itself that it's specifically the Mercury retrograde that has made its notorious name around like the globe and everywhere. And people are, constantly like, oh, you shouldn't do this during Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, and
Do
people
that
are also
retrograde. Yeah.
making joke of people that talk about Mercury retrograde.
Yes,
So
for sure. Yeah.
there is this element of kind of like, verbally fighting a little bit.
Yeah, there's a site called is Mercury in retrograde like .com or whatever, and you can see if Mercury's in retrograde or not, because it's like, oh, okay, Mercury's retrograde, you can blame everything that is happening on Mercury,
Yeah, and other people are like, you stupid. But yeah, I think it's just a funny quality. Also, people, debating about Mercury retrograde. Although, yeah, it's, the debate is triggered by a trickster at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the archetype itself is showing itself through itself.
Yeah.
And I have found for me, and I know many people that do follow astrology regularly, for me, the best way to engage during like I have made my life so much easier when I just laugh when Mercury shows its tricksterness, because then he's like,
Vibing with you.
yeah, he's like vibing with you because that's the trickster energy, and then it's like fun, like it actually like life started to sometimes be fun during Mercury retrogrades for
Yeah,
me
it is
because I
true.
started to engage. Because otherwise, if you just think, oh no, this terrible thing is gonna happen, oh my gosh, like you're exactly going into the trickster territory that it wants you to go in. But when you're like, oh no, 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 like we're gonna play this game together, and
Yeah.
you're just like, you can't do anything to me. I'm gonna laugh. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna laugh with you. And then it's like it becomes like a dance with a
yeah,
trickster, and it
I
wants you
agree.
to dance with it because it
That's
wants you
very
to have more
beautiful.
fun.
Yeah.
So
And maybe you see people around you, I don't know, like your colleagues, your classmates, your whatever, that are, you know, maybe losing the bus for going to school, or, they have problems with the car going to work, or they have all of these problems, and they're like, what the fuck? Why everything doesn't work in this period? And, they're just like annoyed by that. And you're like, I'm just laughing my ass. It's Mercury retrograde.
yeah.
But although I also care about mentioning the fact that, there are certain Mercury retrogrades that are more prominent than other. For example, we had one, I think, in September 2022, in which Mercury was retrograde, and like there was like Mars in Gemini. So like Mars was a little bit more messy too, because its
Mhm.
rulers was retrograde. So you know sometimes it depends. Some Mercury retrogrades are more impacting than others. It really depends. Ask your astrology of faith, and it will tell you.
For
No, but
sure.
it is a thing. So sometimes, as you were saying, being scared, or being scared of doing things just because it's Mercury retrograde, first of all, it's not going to make you live a happy life.
Mm-mm.
But yeah, sometimes Mercury retrograde is overestimated, because it really depends on the period, on the events, on the sign. If something is in Mercury ruled signs and these things. I will be
Yeah.
curious, for example, during Mercury retrogrades where Uranus will be in Gemini. I
Hmm.
don't know. I will be curious about it.
That will definitely be very interesting, especially because as with any planet, at least in Hellenistic astrology, you always look what is going on. Like everything related to Mercury, you always look what is going on in Gemini and what is going on in Virgo.
Mhm.
And that shapes the thing that is going like whatever Mercury is doing, it's shaped by whatever is happening in Virgo and Gemini.
Exactly.
So you always have to look for what is going on. And then also personally, um, again, because I'm just like adding to the fact that again, people make Mercury retrograde seem like a way worse and bigger thing that it is. But sometimes it isn't. And you can either see that by you being
This.
a rising sign that is ruled by,
Mhm.
like, so you're either like a Virgo or Mercury rising, which is gonna make Mercury prominent in your life anyway, because it's your the
Ascendant
steering
ruler.
wheel of your ship. So it's gonna be present anyways. And then of course through timing techniques, which is always so 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 important. If you have a Mercury perfection year, Mercury is going to be so much more prominent, and the Mercury retrogrades will probably hit you specifically a lot harder than they maybe do in other years.
Yeah.
So all these things, or if the Mercury retrograde itself is hitting a specific aspect in your chart. So there's, again, just
Mhm.
always many, many things to take into consideration.
Yeah,
And
of
it's never
course.
just this huge thing that the world's going to fall apart. That's not going to happen.
Exactly, exactly. I think that astrology is like is mercurial, but it then can also be looked at more in a Jupiterian holistic way. And sometimes not all of the details make the big picture.
Yeah. Well, so I love
Sometimes.
I love how we put on our notes to explain it briefly, and we really did not explain it briefly at all.
Yeah, actually, we explained briefly what a retrograde planet is. We
Yeah.
just then started to talk about the retrograde. So yeah, that is
So
funny.
as you see, the trickster is luring us in itself while we're even making the episode. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, this whole episode, I think it's only the third, technically the fourth episode we have been recording. It has been the most like hard to record just because many things were a bit all over the place, and that's definitely like a shadow side.
Yeah,
Gosh, I
but
don't
we were vibing with it. So
we were vibing with it. We were also like, okay, like we can't do it in the most controlled manner. Like we need to just go with the flow. And that is very
exactly.
Gemini in itself, where it's just like, okay, like after Taurus, we need to just learn to go with the flow.
I agree. I think that we've covered everything this far then. Or are we going to regret something?
We will
What do you
probably
think?
regret some things, but luckily we have, other air signs which will make us go back to Gemini, and other mutable signs which will probably make us go back to Gemini and compare the sign. So if we forgot anything, we can maybe mention it there. But I
Yeah, that's
think
a
we
good point.
thought,
Yeah, but I think that we've covered a lot today. It was very fun. We were playful. And yeah, I also had so much fun talking about astrology with you.
yes, we kept it a bit more lighthearted, and it was definitely fun.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for listening, and see you to the next episode, which will be about Cancer. See you.
See you. Bye.